The public is being trained to watch the skies for missiles. This is a strategic misdirection. The primary vector of 21st century warfare is not explosive, but silent. The objective is not to level a city, but to sever the central nervous system of the global economic and military machine. The kinetic cost is irrelevant when the target is insolvency. While legacy media focuses on troop movements, the real battle space is informational. There are two primary targets: the subsea data cables that carry over 99% of global communications, and the orbital satellites that provide GPS and intelligence. These are the pillars of Western military and financial dominance. They are also profoundly fragile. The proliferation of asymmetric weapon systems makes this vulnerability acute. New research warns that drones can launch devastating cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. According to United 24 Media, Russia is already marketing its AI-enabled Kub-2-2E attack drone for export. The tools for systemic disruption are no longer state secrets. They are commodities. A coordinated attack vector, cyber drones targeting subsea cable landing stations, coupled with non-kinetic satellite blinding, does not trigger a conventional military response. It creates confusion and plausible deniability. But its effect is absolute. It creates a blind leviathan. A superpower stripped of its intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. A financial system frozen. A military unable to target with precision. When you blind a giant, it cannot perform surgery. It can only thrash. CSIS wargaming models confirm that when a major power cannot answer an asymmetric attack in kind, its only remaining protocol is disproportionate escalation. This is the mathematical pathway from a silent regional strike to a systemic civilization-level solvency crisis. The pivot to asymmetric warfare is not a sign of strength. It is a declaration of insolvency. When a nation-state's liabilities, political, economic, and kinetic, begin to cascade, it has entered a solvency crisis. Its ability to project conventional power becomes a liability, an anchor dragging it to the bottom. The trigger is almost always domestic. According to CSIS analysis, the primary strategic liability for a state like Russia is not a foreign military, but its own population. An unpopular, high-cost conventional war drains political capital, creating a feedback loop of dissent and repression that becomes mathematically unsustainable. This is not a failure of strategy. It is a forced economic pivot. When you can no longer afford the kinetic cost of a tank-for-tank engagement, you change the equation. You abandon the symmetric battlefield, which you are losing, and force the conflict onto a new vector where you hold the advantage: cost per impact. The new arsenal is already being marketed. Russia is now exporting AI-enabled attack drones like the Kub-2-2-2E. This is the proliferation of a blueprint: cheap, autonomous systems that deliver disproportionate impact. It is a calculated move to commoditize high lethality technology. The vector expands beyond kinetic strikes. New research confirms drones are a platform for devastating cyber attacks, targeting critical infrastructure. This is the ultimate expression of the solvency doctrine. Use a $1,000 asset to neutralize a $1 billion power grid, forcing a crisis your opponent cannot afford to fix. This weakness is the motive. A nation-state facing bankruptcy on the conventional ledger is forced to open a new asymmetric ledger where it can impose infinite costs on its adversary for a finite investment. This isn't warfare. It's a hostile economic takeover executed with new tools. The entire economic equation of conventional warfare is now insolvent. The kinetic cost exchange is inverted, creating a systemic liability for any major power-fielding legacy assets. The math doesn't lie. Reports from analysts at RUSI confirm the core metric. A $5 million main battle tank can now be functionally neutralized, its mission capability destroyed by a $500 FPV drone. This is not an anomaly. It is the blueprint for a new paradigm of conflict. This extreme cost asymmetry is the engine of what strategists term the democratization of violence. The state's historic monopoly on high-impact kinetic force has been broken. The barrier to entry for projecting catastrophic force against critical infrastructure has collapsed to the price of consumer electronics. This is not just a tactical problem. It is a solvency crisis for the entire Western military-industrial complex, which is structured to produce exquisite, expensive, and now exceptionally vulnerable platforms. As analysts at RUSI have articulated, when a multi-billion-dollar armored brigade can be halted by an adversary spending less than the cost of a single tank shell, conventional superiority becomes a fatal vulnerability, an economic trap. The primary theater of operations is no longer a declared battlefield. It is the systemic breakdown of states previously considered stable. These are the gray zones. Analysts at CSIS and RUSI confirm that the mass export of systems like Russia's AI-enabled QB222E attack drone is not for a hypothetical war. It is for immediate deployment in these peripheral territories. These regions serve as a proxy laboratory. New research warns that when a cyber drone is used to attack critical infrastructure, the objective is not a local kinetic victory. The objective is to test the response protocol of a major power at a distance, to map the vectors of systemic failure, and to calculate the precise threshold for triggering a solvency crisis in a rival economy. This isn't a mistake, it's a feature. The instability is a cultivated environment, providing the necessary legal and political ambiguity to stage asymmetric attacks without triggering the disproportionate escalation that renders conventional superiority a liability. The protocol is designated Launch on Warning. It is a pre-authorized systemic response to a decapitation strike. If an adversary blinds a nation's early warning systems, the commander does not have a choice. The commander has a checklist. The assumption is that kinetic assets are already inbound, and the time to react is measured in seconds. The fear is not of what is seen on the radar, but what is no longer seen. This is no longer a hypothetical. This is the fog of digital war. The vector is not a multi-billion-dollar bomber. It is a low-cost, mass-producible drone. New research warns that drones are the optimal platform for launching devastating cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. Concurrently, state actors like Russia are actively exporting AI-enabled attack drones such as the QB22E. When a swarm of these cyber drones neutralizes a satellite network or blinds ground-based radar, the commander is presented with a zero-sum calculation. Is it a limited electronic attack, or is it the prelude to a full-spectrum nuclear first strike? According to analysts at RUSI, waiting for kinetic confirmation is not a viable strategy. The Launch on Warning protocol exists specifically to counter this ambiguity by defaulting to the worst-case scenario. This creates a systemic liability. A major power, blinded by an attack it cannot answer in kind, has its conventional superiority rendered irrelevant. The only remaining leverage is disproportionate escalation. The protocol, designed for a Cold War paradigm, becomes an accelerant. It creates a direct mathematical pathway from a localized asymmetric cyber attack to a global solvency crisis. This is not a failure of the system. It is the system functioning as designed under new technological pressures. The calibration forecast. Within the next 12 months, expect a catastrophic multi-hour blackout at a Tier 1 subsea cable landing station or Internet exchange point. The target vector will be in the Nordic region, exploiting known seams in NATO cohesion. The official report will cite unprecedented cascading hardware failure. This will be a lie. The actual attack vector will be a localized, drone-delivered cyber assault. This is not theory. It is documented capability. Research from entities like Capacity Global confirms drones can execute devastating cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. Concurrently, state actors are mass exporting AI-enabled loitering munitions like Russia's QB22E, creating a global marketplace for attribution-impossible kinetic and non-kinetic strikes. This event is not an act of war. It is a calibration shot. The objective is to field test the weapon system and measure the systemic response, the latency of NATO's political decision-making, the fragility of interdependent financial markets, and the exact kinetic cost required to neutralize a Western power's data solvency. It is the live-fire exercise for an era where the aircraft carrier is a strategic liability, proving that a major power can be neutralized by an adversary who cannot be identified and therefore cannot be targeted for conventional retaliation. The only remaining response is disproportionate escalation against a suspected, but unproven, aggressor.